A fairy tale wedding turning into an orchestrated nightmare. This is the story we are breaking today, a story of jealousy so profound, so corrosive, it led to a calculated campaign of sabotage designed to shatter Amy Roloff's happiest day. For weeks, we've heard whispers of bad luck plaguing Amy and Chris's wedding plans, but our sources are now confirming this was no string of unfortunate events. It was a malicious plot, and the person at the center of it all is none other than Caryn Chandler. The evidence we've uncovered is shocking, painting a disturbing picture of a woman consumed by envy, willing to go to unbelievable lengths to ruin the wedding of the woman she replaced. How did one woman's envy nearly destroy everything, and how was her intricate web of deceit finally exposed? The details are more stunning than you can imagine. Before we dive into the shocking evidence and the timeline of this wedding sabotage, we need your help. If you believe in getting the real story and want to see the truth come to light, take a moment right now to hit that powerful button. Be sure to subscribe to LPBW Update and ring that notification bell. We are following this story every second, and you will not want to miss a single update as the fallout from this explosive confrontation continues to unfold. Your support helps us bring these exclusive reports to you. Now, let's get into the dark and twisted tale of the sabotage wedding. It all started, as these things often do, with a sense of joy and optimism. Amy and Chris were on cloud nine. After years of navigating the complexities of post-divorce life and finding true love again, their wedding was meant to be a celebration of a hard-won victory. It was their moment, a day they wanted to be uniquely and completely their own. Their first major decision in this journey was the venue. They spent weeks exploring options, looking for a place that felt like a fresh start, a symbol of their new life together. They found it in a beautiful, independent venue nestled in the Oregon countryside, a charming, rustic estate with sprawling gardens and a classic barn that was elegant, private, and, most importantly, neutral territory. It had no history, no ghosts of the past. It was a blank canvas on which they could paint the first day of the rest of their lives. When they announced their choice to the family, the reaction was mostly positive. But sources who were present for the conversation described Caryn Chandler's response as noticeably cool. While others offered enthusiastic congratulations, Caryn's smile was said to be tight, her praise hollow. She reportedly made a series of passive-aggressive comments, each one a subtle jab disguised as a helpful observation. "Oh, that's an interesting choice," she allegedly began, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I just assumed, with all the space and history at the farm, it would have been so meaningful, but I'm sure your little place will be lovely." To an outsider, the comments might have seemed harmless, but to those who understand the complex dynamics of the Roloff family, the message was crystal clear. For years, Caryn had been positioning herself as the new matriarch of Roloff Farms. After working as the farm manager and then entering into a relationship with Matt, she had slowly but surely embedded herself into the fabric of the property Amy had helped build for decades. In her mind, the farm was now her domain. Amy and Chris choosing an independent venue was not just a logistical decision, it was a powerful statement. It was Amy reclaiming her independence and refusing to allow her new beginning to be staged on Caryn's turf. According to our insider reports, this was a slight Caryn could not stomach. Her jealousy, which had been simmering for years, began to boil over. She felt disrespected, overlooked, and, most of all, powerless. And it was from this bitter well of resentment that the plot to sabotage the wedding appears to have been born. The first disaster struck just 1 week before the wedding day, a time when stress levels are already at their peak. Amy received a frantic, apologetic call from the owner of their dream venue. The words that came through the phone were a dagger to the heart. The venue was being forced to shut down temporarily. An anonymous tip had been called into the county health department alleging a severe and non-existent pest problem. The caller had been specific, mentioning fabricated details about a rodent infestation in the kitchen and unsanitary conditions that posed a public health risk. The health department, legally obligated to investigate such a serious claim, had no choice but to issue a temporary closure notice pending a full inspection, which wouldn't be completed for at least 2 weeks. The venue owner was devastated for them, but her hands were tied. With only 7 days to go, Amy and Chris's booking was canceled. Their perfect venue was gone. Amy was beside herself, her dream turning into a logistical nightmare. Chris was there to comfort her, but as he held a sobbing Amy, his mind was already racing. A practical man, a problem solver by nature, he found the timing and the nature of the tip to be more than just a coincidence. It felt targeted. It felt personal. This was the first seed of suspicion, a tiny, nagging thought that this wasn't bad luck, it was an attack. As they scrambled to find a last-minute replacement venue, a Herculean task in itself, the next blow fell. It was even more bizarre and cruel than the first. Amy was on the phone with their chosen caterer, a highly sought-after local chef they had booked nearly a year in advance, to finalize the menu details. The caterer sounded confused. "Amy, I'm so sorry," he said, "but we already filled your date. We canceled your booking 2 weeks ago." Amy was stunned into silence. Canceled? They had done no such thing. The caterer explained that he had received an email supposedly from Amy's assistant, politely informing him that the wedding date had been moved to a month later due to unforeseen circumstances and that they would be in touch to rebook. Since he hadn't heard back, he had given their original date to another couple. The blood drained from Amy's face. She didn't have an assistant. The email was a complete fabrication. Someone had impersonated her, using a plausible-sounding lie to methodically dismantle her wedding plans. The cruelty was breathtaking. This wasn't just causing a problem. It was a calculated move designed to create maximum chaos and heartbreak. While Amy reeled from the shock, Chris's suspicion hardened into cold certainty. This was a coordinated campaign. 2 major vendors, 2 separate strange cancellations, all happening within days of each other. The pattern was undeniable. He calmly asked the caterer a simple question that would change everything. "Could you do me a favor? Could you forward me that fake email?" The third strike came less than a day later, confirming Chris's darkest theories. It was the florist. Much like the caterer, they called with a tone of confusion. Their entire elaborate order of flowers, the bouquets, the centerpieces, the arrangements that were meant to bring color and life to the celebration, had been mysteriously canceled. When Amy pressed for details, the story was eerily similar yet distinct. The florist explained that they had received a call from a woman with a blocked number a few days prior. The woman claimed to be a close family friend who was helping Amy with the planning. She had explained in a very convincing and concerned tone that Amy was having second thoughts about the floral arrangements and wanted to cancel the entire order to reevaluate her vision. The caller had been so smooth, so seemingly knowledgeable about the family, that the florist hadn't thought to question it. This was the final straw. The systematic destruction of their wedding was undeniable. Amy's devastation was now mixed with a white-hot anger. Who would do this? Who could be so filled with hatred and malice as to meticulously tear apart the happiest day of her life, piece by piece? For Chris, the time for emotion was over. It was time for action. He was no longer just a concerned fiancé. He was an investigator, determined to unmask the saboteur who was tormenting the woman he loved. He had a theory, a prime suspect in his mind, but he knew he needed more than just a hunch. He needed proof, hard, irrefutable evidence. Chris's investigation began with a methodical return to each point of failure. He wasn't going to let this go. His first call was back to the owner of the original venue. He calmly explained the series of accidents that had followed their cancellation and asked her to recall anything she could about the anonymous tipster. He asked if there was anything about the caller's voice or phrasing that stood out. The venue owner paused, thinking back. "You know," she said slowly, "it was strange. The woman who called, she sounded oddly familiar with your family. She didn't just make a generic complaint. She mentioned things, little details. She said it was a shame that Matt's beautiful farm wasn't being used and that it was probably a safer, cleaner option anyway. It felt less like a concerned citizen and more like someone with a personal grudge." This was the first critical piece of the puzzle. The mention of Matt's farm was a direct echo of Caryn's passive-aggressive comments. It was a clear link, albeit circumstantial, between the saboteur and Caryn's expressed jealousy. It showed a specific motive, a clear line of thinking that pointed directly back to her. Chris thanked the owner, his resolve strengthening. He now had a motive and a consistent theme. Next, he turned his attention to the second piece of evidence, the fake email sent to the caterer. The caterer, now fully aware of the deception, had already forwarded the email as Chris requested. At first glance, it looked professional enough. The sender's address was a generic Gmail account, something like Roloff Events Planner, created to sound official and disposable. The language was polite and businesslike. But Chris wasn't interested in the words on the screen. He knew the real secrets were hidden in the email's metadata. He opened the original email file and went looking for the header information, the digital breadcrumbs that track an email's journey across the internet. And there it was, the originating IP address. For those unfamiliar, an IP address is a unique numerical label assigned to each device connected to a computer network. It acts like a digital fingerprint, a return address for the computer or phone that sent the message. While a skilled hacker can mask their IP address, Chris was betting that the saboteur was arrogant or perhaps simply not tech-savvy enough to cover their tracks. He copied the IP address and pasted it into an online tracer. The results came back in seconds. The IP address wasn't from a private home network, which would have been too easy to trace directly. Instead, it resolved to a public Wi-Fi hotspot. His heart pounded as the location loaded on the map. The hotspot was registered to a small, independent coffee shop on the outskirts of Hillsborough, a place called The Daily Grind. Chris's blood ran cold. He knew that coffee shop. Everyone in the family knew that coffee shop. It was Caryn Chandler's absolute favorite spot. She was a regular, a creature of habit. He had seen countless photos she had posted on her social media accounts of her morning latte with the coffee shop's distinct logo visible on the cup. She was there at least 2 or 3 times a week, often during her lunch breaks from the farm. This was no longer a coincidence. It was a direct, tangible link. The person who impersonated Amy and canceled the caterer had sent the email from the very location Caryn frequented on a near-daily basis. The circumstantial evidence was now overwhelming. Chris pictured her sitting there, sipping her coffee, typing out the malicious email with a self-satisfied smirk on her face, convinced of her own cleverness. He imagined her feeling a thrill of power as she hit send, knowing the chaos and pain it would cause, believing she was completely anonymous and untraceable. But she had made a mistake. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated his love for Amy and the lengths he would go to protect her. He now had a timeline, a motive, a verbal confirmation of her jealousy from the venue owner, and a digital fingerprint placing the sabotage at her favorite hangout. The net was closing in tighter and tighter. But he still needed one more piece, one final undeniable smoking gun that would make it impossible for her to lie her way out of it. And that final piece would come from the florist. Chris made his final call, his voice steady and calm, masking the storm of emotions brewing inside him. He dialed the number for the florist's shop. When the owner answered, Chris introduced himself and explained the situation. not with panic, but with the cool precision of someone simply gathering facts. He told her about the other cancellations, painting a picture of a coordinated effort, and asked if she could walk him through the cancellation call she had received down to the smallest detail. The florist, sympathetic and now deeply concerned, was more than willing to help. She recalled the call vividly. The number was blocked, which was unusual, but the woman on the other end had been disarmingly convincing. Her voice, the florist began. It was smooth, calm, almost motherly. She sounded genuinely worried for Amy. The woman had introduced herself not by name, but as a very old friend of the family who was helping with some of the less glamorous wedding logistics. She explained that Amy was feeling incredibly overwhelmed, that the stress was getting to her, and that she had made some hasty decisions with the flowers that she was now regretting. The caller's tone was one of feigned empathy, painting a picture of Amy as a damsel in distress who needed saving from her own bad judgment. It was a classic manipulation tactic designed to make the florist feel like she was participating in a kind and helpful act. The caller had said things like, Amy's just not thinking clearly right now, and the last thing we want is for her to look back on her wedding photos and hate the flowers. It's better to just cancel everything and give her a chance to breathe and start fresh. It was so plausible, so seemingly well-intentioned, that the florist had agreed without demanding to speak to Amy directly. Chris listened intently, every word cementing the image in his mind. Then he asked the most important question. Did she say anything else? Anything at all about who she was or her connection to the family? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Yes, the florist said, her voice suddenly certain. That's the part that stuck with me. Right at the end of the call, I asked if I should expect to hear from Amy or a new wedding planner. The woman laughed a little chuckle and said, "Oh, I'm not a planner. I'm just helping out. I used to work at the farm for years, so I know how things should be done. I'm just trying to help Amy avoid a mistake." The words hit Chris like a physical blow. That was it, the smoking gun. I used to work at the farm for years. That phrase, that specific identifying piece of personal history, pointed to one person and one person only, Caryn Chandler. It was her entire backstory, the foundation of her relationship with Matt, the very thing she used to legitimize her position in the family. It was a detail so unique to her, so perfectly fitting, that it was as good as a signed confession. The caller hadn't just sabotaged the flowers, she had left her calling card. She had been so consumed by her own arrogance and her belief that she was the true authority on all things farm that she had inadvertently identified herself. The investigation was over. Chris now held every piece of the puzzle, a clear motive of jealousy, a timeline of systematic attacks, and a trail of evidence, verbal, digital, and now a direct self-incriminating statement that all led to Caryn's front door. He ended the call, his heart heavy. There was no joy in this discovery, only a grim, sickening certainty. Now came the hardest part, telling Amy that her future mother-in-law's partner, a woman she was supposed to build a future with, was the architect of her misery. He found Amy in their living room, staring blankly at a pile of wedding magazines, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a despair that tore at his heart. He sat down beside her, taking her hand. He knew he had to handle this with incredible care. She was already fragile, and this truth had the power to shatter her completely. "Amy," he began softly, "we need to talk. I've been making some calls about what's been happening, and I think I know who's behind it." He didn't present it as a theory or an accusation. He presented it as a cold, hard case file. He started with the venue, recounting what the owner had told him about the anonymous tipster and the pointed, jealous remark about Matt's farm. Amy's brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It sounded just like something Caryn would say. Next, he moved to the caterer. He explained the fabricated email from the non-existent assistant. Then he showed her his laptop screen, the results of the IP address Trace opened for her to see. He pointed to the location pinned on the map. This is where the email was sent from Amy, the daily grind, Caryn's coffee shop. Amy's breath hitched. She stared at the screen, the pieces visibly clicking into place in her mind. The color drained from her face as the ugly possibility began to morph into an unthinkable reality. She started to shake her head, a silent plea for it not to be true. But Chris wasn't finished. He saved the most damning piece for last. "And then," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I spoke to the florist." He repeated the florist's story word for word, ending with the saboteur's fatal mistake, her self-identifying boast. She told them she used to work at the farm for years and was just trying to help you avoid a mistake. At those words, Amy finally broke. A strangled sob escaped her lips. It wasn't a cry of surprise, but a profound, soul-crushing confirmation. The denial she had been clinging to crumbled into dust. The truth was too specific, too layered, too overwhelmingly clear to be ignored. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a series of unlucky coincidences. This was a deliberate, malicious, and deeply personal attack orchestrated by Caryn. The betrayal was staggering. For years, Amy had endured the subtle digs, the passive aggression, the feeling of being replaced in her own home. She had tried to be the bigger person, to build a civil, if not warm, relationship for the sake of the family. And this was how it was repaid, with a secret campaign of psychological warfare designed to ruin the most important day of her new life. The hurt was immense, a physical pain in her chest. All the years of tension, of unspoken resentment, of feeling like Caryn was constantly undermining her, had culminated in this one monstrous act of cruelty. As Amy cried, Chris held her, letting her process the sheer weight of the betrayal. After a few minutes, her tears of sorrow began to turn into tears of anger. "How could she?" she whispered, her voice raw. "After everything, how could she be so hateful?" In that moment, Chris knew they had to do something. Letting this go was not an option. This wasn't just about a ruined wedding venue or a canceled caterer. This was about drawing a line. It was about standing up to a pattern of toxic behavior that, if left unchecked, would poison their family indefinitely. "We have to confront her, Amy," Chris said, his tone resolute. "And Matt needs to be there. He needs to see it. He needs to hear the evidence from us, so he can't ignore it or explain it away." Amy, wiping her eyes, looked up at him. The fear and hurt were still there, but a new resolve was hardening in her gaze. She nodded. "You're right," she said, her voice stronger now. "He has to know. He has to see what she's really capable of." Their plan was simple, and its power was in its simplicity. They wouldn't yell or scream. They wouldn't make emotional accusations. They would be calm, methodical, and armed with indisputable facts. They would lay out the evidence piece by piece and let Caryn hang herself with her own lies. Chris sent a text to Matt requesting an urgent meeting at their house that evening. He kept the reason vague, saying only that they needed to discuss some serious last-minute complications with the wedding and that it was vital both he and Caryn were there. Matt, likely assuming it was a financial or logistical crisis he could help solve, agreed immediately. A few hours later, Matt and Caryn arrived, walking into an atmosphere so thick with tension it was practically suffocating. Caryn had a look of performative concern on her face, ready to play the part of the supportive future family member. "Oh my goodness, what happened?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Is everything okay with the wedding?" Chris gestured for them to sit down on the sofa, directly across from where he and Amy were sitting. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, watching Caryn's faux concerned smile begin to falter. "Matt, Caryn," Chris began, his voice devoid of emotion, "thank you for coming. We're not here to ask for help. we're here to lay out some facts. As you know, we've had a series of disasters with our wedding planning. Our venue, our caterer, our florist, we thought it was bad luck, but it wasn't. He paused, looking directly at Caryn, whose face had gone rigid. It was sabotage, and we know who did it. Matt looked utterly bewildered, glancing from Chris to Amy. Sabotage? What are you talking about? Who would do that? Caryn, on the other hand, immediately went on the defensive. That's a horrible thing to say. Why would you even think that? Chris ignored her outburst and began to calmly lay out the timeline, just as he had for Amy. First, the venue. They were shut down by an anonymous tip to the health department. The tipster, a woman, made a very specific comment to the owner. She said it was a shame you weren't using Matt's beautiful farm because it was probably a safer, cleaner option. He locked eyes with Caryn. Sound familiar? Caryn scoffed, forcing a laugh. That's ridiculous. I've said that to dozens of people. I think the farm is a great venue. That proves absolutely nothing. She looked at Matt for support, who still just looked confused. Chris remained unfazed. Okay, let's move on to the caterer. They were canceled by a fake email sent from an assistant Amy doesn't have. Caryn folded her arms. So, anyone could have done that. Some crazy fan of the show, maybe. You two live a very public life. Her explanation was weak, but it was an attempt at creating reasonable doubt. This is when Chris sprung the trap. You're right, he said evenly. Anyone could have sent it, but the person who did was very careless. We traced the IP address of the email. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. It was sent from the public Wi-Fi at the Daily Grind coffee shop. Your favorite coffee shop, Caryn. The one you go to 3 or 4 times a week. The blood drained from Caryn's face. Her mask of indignation slipped, revealing a flash of pure panic. I'm there all the time, she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. Someone else must have been there. This is a witch hunt. You're framing me. Matt finally spoke up, looking at Chris with pleading eyes. Chris, this is a stretch. It's just a coincidence. But his voice lacked conviction. He could see the look on Caryn's face. He knew how much she loved that coffee shop. The coincidence was becoming harder and harder to swallow. Chris knew it was time for the final devastating blow. He held up his hand to silence the rising protests. I'm not finished, he said, his gaze unwavering and fixed on Caryn. The final piece, the florist, their entire order was canceled by a phone call from a blocked number. The caller was a woman who claimed to be a close family friend. He let the words sink in before delivering the kill shot. She told the florist, and I quote, I used to work at the farm for years, so I know how things should be done. I'm just trying to help Amy avoid a mistake. Silence. A dead, heavy, absolute silence fell over the room. There was no explanation for that. There was no plausible deniability. No coincidence could account for a statement so specific, so personal, so uniquely tied to Caryn and no one else. Matt turned his head slowly to look at Caryn, his face a canvas of dawning horror. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. The denials died on Caryn's lips. Her face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of the supportive partner, the benevolent farm matriarch, disintegrated in an instant, revealing the bitter, jealous, and malicious person underneath. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was caught. The evidence was absolute, the logic inescapable. She was exposed. Matt stared at her, his expression shifting from disbelief to a deep, gut-wrenching disappointment. He had defended her for years against Amy's suspicions, against the whispers from fans, against his own nagging doubts. He had chosen to believe in the best version of her. Now, faced with this cold, hard evidence of her cruelty, he was forced to see that her jealousy wasn't just a passive resentment he could manage. It was an active, malevolent force. She was capable of calculated, cruel sabotage against the mother of his children. The foundation of his reality trembled. The confrontation ended not with a bang, but with a sickening, silent implosion. Caryn began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a manipulator who had been caught. The game was up. In the days that followed, the family was plunged into a state of crisis. The wedding, now just days away, seemed like a distant afterthought. But after the initial shock subsided, Amy and Chris realized they could not let Caryn win. They would not let her poison their joy. They deserved their happy day. In a surprising turn, a deeply shaken and remorseful Matt came to them. He apologized profusely, not for Caryn's actions, but for his own blindness. He had enabled her, he admitted, by refusing to see what was right in front of him. And then he made an offer. "Have the wedding here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "At the farm, please. Let me help you fix this. This is Amy's home, too. She built it. Don't let her take that from you." Initially, Amy hesitated. The farm was now tainted by Caryn's presence. But then she looked at it differently. It wasn't Caryn's farm. It was the farm she had raised her children on. The farm she had poured her blood, sweat, and tears into for 30 years. To have her wedding there now would not be a concession. It would be the ultimate act of reclamation. It would be a powerful statement that she would not be driven away from her own legacy. They accepted. On one condition, Caryn Chandler was not to be anywhere on the property. In an incredible whirlwind of activity, with Matt and the entire Roloff family rallying around them, they moved the entire wedding to Roloff Farms. It was a testament to their resilience and the love that surrounded them. The day of the wedding was beautiful. It was a celebration not just of Amy and Chris's love, but of their victory over hatred and betrayal. They stood under the old oak tree on ground that held so much of Amy's history and made new promises for a bright future. The sabotage had failed. It had, in a strange way, backfired, stripping away the lies and forcing a painful truth into the light, ultimately making Amy and Chris's bond even stronger. They had faced the worst, and they had not only survived, but triumphed. This shocking saga of jealousy and sabotage has forever altered the landscape of the Roloff family. The exposure of Caryn Chandler's calculated plot has drawn a line in the sand, forcing Matt to confront a devastating truth about the woman he loves. Can the family ever truly recover from a betrayal this deep? And what does the future hold for Matt and Caryn now that her malicious actions have been brought into the light? This is a story that is far from over. We want to know what you think. Was Chris right to investigate? Should Amy have forgiven Matt so easily? Let us know your explosive thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe the truth needs to be heard, smash that like button, subscribe to LPBW Update, and ring that notification bell because we will be following every single development in this incredible story.